In May of 1993, President Bill Clinton signed a law authorizing the American Battle Monuments Commission to establish a World War II memorial in Washington, D.C. The first step in establishing the memorial was to choose a site. So in 1995, Congress gave its approval for the monument to be built at the Rainbow Pool site at the east end of the reflecting pool between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. Simultaneously, a major fundraising effort was begun. The fundraising campaign was led by National Chairman Senator Bob Dole, the longest-serving Republican in the U.S. Senate, and himself a World War II veteran who had been seriously wounded on the battlefield and twice decorated with the Bronze Star and Purple Heart. The fundraising effort raised more than $197 million, primarily in private contributions. Construction on the project began in September of 2001, and the monument opened to the public in April of 2004, with a dedication ceremony held on May 29, 2004. The purpose of the massive monument was to honor the 16 million Americans who served in the U.S. Armed Forces during World War II, the more than 400,000 who died, and the millions who supported the war effort from home. It also serves as a reminder and a teaching tool so that future generations of Americans will understand and appreciate all that the World War II generation did in securing our freedom and democracy. Once the monument was completed, people began to realize that members of the greatest generation were leaving us at a rapid pace. Many of the very people that the monument was meant to honor would never have a chance to see their grand memorial in Washington. So with that thought in mind, the idea of the Honor Flight was born. Honor Flight programs quickly sprang up all over the U.S., including in Etowah County, Alabama.
The Patriots flight here in the local community started out about early 2009. It started out late 2008, so it's been a long-term project. We started out looking at ways to take our World War II veterans up to Washington, D.C. for one day. And we decided to go with what we call Patriots Flight, so we could work under the auspices of the Patriots program here in Etowah County, which is already a tax-exempt organization. So we called ours Patriots Flight, which is synonymous with Honor Flight.
Members of the Gadsden Etowah Patriots Association put together a volunteer board and with the help of about 30 volunteers began making preparations for the group's first Patriot Flight. That first flight was a joint venture with a group from Huntsville, and 10 local veterans made their trip to see the memorial. Flight number 2 occurred in October of 2009 when Etowah County veterans and their guardians joined up with an Honor Flight group from Birmingham. Then in May of 2010, 49 local veterans and a host of guardians made a solo flight to the memorial. The program you are about to see is the story of that trip. The amount of work that goes into preparing for a Patriot flight is incredible. So many details, so many things that have to fall into place perfectly to safely and efficiently take 49 men and women, all in their 80s and 90s, on a one-day trip to Washington, D.C.
Each trip we had to arrange for wheelchairs. Every veteran that required a wheelchair had a wheelchair, and we of course took a few extra wheelchairs just in case somebody got a little bit tired on the trip. And the local supply areas for medical supplies provided the wheelchairs at no charge. We had on our last trip 3 veterans that were on full-time oxygen, and some of the local medical supply companies provided the oxygen generators at no charge. So that shows some of the community support. Of course, we had to contact a local church. East Gadsden Baptist Church provided 2 buses to provide transportation for us. We had refreshments before we left, and refreshments at the airport.
There was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 or 50 people who had been working for many months to make it happen. And again, I go back to put the puzzle together.
As those details were being handled and all of the logistics being put into place, Jerry Hurd was busy interviewing veterans and running the selection process.
Once I made sure they were eligible for the program, then I would sit down and get all the technical information. We had to have not only their address, but we had to have a point of contact's address and telephone number, any additional phone numbers that they would like to provide, and in many cases a third individual, so that during the flight we'd have someone we could contact if necessary. If we had questions, we'd have someone we could call and get the answers to those questions. I had them bring in the list of the medications. Not that I'm a doctor, but we wanted to make sure they were aware that they had to have, we asked them to bring 3 days of the medication, so that if we had a delay in the flight, they wouldn't be without medication for those that downtime. But it's amazing the long list of medications that some of these folks took with them. But we also checked for things like the need for oxygen. I got the name of the doctor and the doctor's phone numbers if we needed those. And then we went into the service. Some of them would go into detail, some wouldn't. I just get a brief description. What did you do? And it was anywhere from, well, I just went with my unit and came back. And others would go into 30, 45-minute recitations of what they did and when they did it.
Each veteran on Patriot flight is assigned a guardian. The guardian's job is to look after their assigned veteran and attend to their various needs throughout the day. But most of all, the guardian's job is to make sure that their veteran has a wonderful time on the trip. Chuck Limbaugh is the volunteer in charge of the guardians.
The guardians take care, of any veteran's needs, actually from before the flight begins all the way through. The veterans the guardians are responsible for, just assisting veterans on and off of the buses and on and off the planes, because naturally you're dealing with guys. I think about the youngest one we've had was 81 till about 91, 92. And so, fortunately, a lot of the guys get around really well on their own, but as you would imagine, there are several that, that need quite a bit of assistance. And it's just the guardian's job, to take care of them, make sure they take their medicines, give them, when it's time for the food, make sure they eat a little bit, help them to the restrooms. The Birmingham group had a saying that, and it was pretty good. They said, if a veteran falls, he better land on a guardian.
Once the veterans and guardians are chosen, an orientation meeting is held for both groups. Jerry Hurd leads the presentation for the veterans, giving them important information about their trip and what they can expect out of their day. Chuck Limbaugh leads the session for the guardians, where they are given advice by experienced guardians about the best ways to make sure their veterans have a safe and enjoyable trip. The big moment of the night is when the guardians are paired up with their veterans for the first time. When the big day finally arrives, volunteers, guardians, veterans, and family members get an early start on the day.
Get there at 3:30. The buses show up. We have a short invocation for the group and a Pledge of Allegiance. Marry up with the guardians and get on the buses.
The buses, which were provided by East Gadsden Baptist Church, then head out to Birmingham, where the flight participants board a Southwest Airlines charter flight to Baltimore, Maryland. From Baltimore, the group was bused into Washington, D.C., where the first order of business was lunch. Veterans and guardians were treated to a box lunch and allowed a few minutes to stretch their legs in a park along the Potomac River. Refreshed now after a long morning of travel, it was finally time to see the monument up close. The group spent about 2 hours wandering around the huge memorial. The first stop on most agendas was to see and get their pictures made with the giant pillar representing Alabama. Hundreds of people crowded the monument that day, including other honor flight groups from around the country, tourists, and several groups of school children on field trips. One group had even held their very own memorial ceremony right there at the monument. All around the monument grounds, veterans were walking with their guardians, taking in the sights and constantly being stopped by visitors, asking them questions and saying thank you for your service. Even visiting school children received a special treat by getting to hear the veteran stories and getting their history lesson that day from the men and women who actually lived it.
The process at the memorial was fairly touching. We had kids from the local schools would come in and get off buses and go around shaking hands with all the veterans. And we had, I'd say there were 3 or 4 groups there the same day we were, and they were all treated the same way, just like royalty.
Before boarding the bus again, the veterans were treated to a surprise visit from 4th Congressional District Congressman Robert Adderholt, who took a little time between votes on the House floor to come to the monument and visit with the Patriot flight from his district. As always, the visit to the World War II monument ended way too quickly, but was nonetheless an emotional and moving experience for all who were there. Some of the veterans share their thoughts.
Beautiful, wonderful. I was stationed here for 2 years in the waves, and it's just gorgeous. I'm so glad to come back to see it.
I think it's beautiful. Appreciate them building it. Oh, it was outstanding. I've never been here before, and it's just awesome. It really is.
This is about the most fantastic place I've been in a long, long, long time. The people that greet you are wonderful, and it just takes your breath away.
Well, it looks real nice. It's my first time to be here. It sure does look nice. God sure has blessed our country.
It's just great. I've been to Washington many times, but hadn't been here since they built the World War II monument. And it's just beautiful. It really is.
I think it's just magnificent, and I'm just so proud to get to come, and I want to thank the Patriot Association so very much for that opportunity. And it's just a thrill of my lifetime to come and visit this beautiful place. It's magnificent. It was a little slow about building it, but they made up for it in quality.
Really is nice. And we appreciate the Gadsden Patriot Association for sending us World War II veterans over here to see this on an airplane, and the buses around, buy us food, and it's just a great thing.
After an exhausting but enjoyable day in Washington, which, by the way, also included a quick stop at the Marine Memorial, the veterans thought their big day was finally winding down. Little did they know that hundreds of people were waiting back at Cross Point Community Church, preparing for a huge homecoming event. Friends, family members, and people from around the community had gathered to be there for the return of their hometown heroes.
Again, whether it's coming off the plane or whether it's getting off the buses when we get back to Cross Point from our flights here that that we've taken on ourselves, it's the same thing, and it's great to see. My anticipation every time it's been after my first one is the reception when they get back. The adulation they receive throughout the day, and then the reception when they get back is just really something.
The returning veterans were greeted with patriotic music, an ROTC honor guard, people waving flags and holding signs and treating our old soldiers to one more triumphant homecoming.
I was privileged to have a 30-year Army career. Been a lot of places and done a lot of things. And it's the camaraderie of the service that every military person knows what they've been through to get here. And it's something that you can't express until you've been there. And to me, to watch these old soldiers that went out and did their duty, and some hard duty, and you'll have to talk with them to find out just how hard it was, and it's hard to explain it, just how difficult their life was for years. I remember one veteran telling me, yeah, I signed up, left home, and 5 years later I got home again. And it's hard to relate to that. 18, 19, 20-year-old kids that are soldiers saving this world for democracy. To me, it's the greatest reward is they did what they had to do, asked for nothing else, came home and started living again. But it's the ability to relate to what they've done. Because I've been many places around the world where you didn't have running water, no electricity, and bad guys shooting at you. And sometimes you didn't know if you were going to make it back to Etowah County. And that's what makes life so precious and so meaningful, is having experienced what they experienced and able to give back to them a small token of appreciation. And that's what all the volunteers did. The entire Patriot Association, the volunteers, the guardians, everybody that supported this program, that's their way of saying thank you for what you've done and thank you for making us free.